My name is Vera, and I'm 58 years old. For 15 years, I helped raise my granddaughter Madison, while my son Jason and his wife Stephanie struggled financially. Last month, Stephanie called me practically vibrating with excitement about a $50,000 Caribbean cruise. She spoke about presidential suites and private butlers like it was already booked. Something in her tone made my stomach twist. I'd heard this expectant voice before, always followed by an outstretched hand. As I listened to her detailed description of marble bathrooms and champagne service, I remembered all the times I'd opened my wallet without question. But this time felt different. This time I hesitated. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Have you ever felt taken advantage of by family members? Let me know in the comments, because what happened after I said no will shock you. Looking back, I realize I'd been enabling Jason and Stephanie for years without even knowing it. It started innocently enough when Madison was born. Jason was working construction, and Stephanie had just finished nursing school. Money was tight, so I helped with Madison's daycare costs. $500 here, $800 there. It felt natural, what any grandmother would do, but those small helps turned into bigger requests. When Madison needed dental work, I paid the $3,000 bill. When their car broke down, I covered the repair costs. When they wanted to buy their first house, I provided the $20,000 down payment. Each time they promised it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. Stephanie had this way of making requests that didn't sound like requests. She'd mention how other families took elaborate vacations, how Madison felt left out when her friends talked about Disney World. She'd sigh about their old furniture, their outdated kitchen, their need for a bigger car. Jason would chime in about wanting to provide better for his family, about feeling like he was failing as a father and husband. I remember the day they asked for help with the BMW. Stephanie had been driving a 10-year-old Honda, perfectly functional, but not flashy enough for her new position at the hospital. She'd gotten a promotion to head nurse, and suddenly she needed a car that matched her status. The monthly payments were only $600, she explained, but they were still paying off Madison's braces and couldn't handle another expense. I found myself at this dealership signing papers for a car I'd never drive. Stephanie hugged me tight, calling me the best mother-in-law in the world. Jason seemed relieved, grateful that his wife was happy. Madison bounced in the back seat, thrilled about the heated seats and sunroof. In that moment, their joy felt worth every penny. But the requests never stopped. There was always another crisis, another opportunity, another need that only I could fill. When I tallied it up one sleepless night, I'd given them over $300,000 in 15 years. My retirement account, once robust, had dwindled significantly. The inheritance my husband left me had been carved away piece by piece. My friend Dorothy had been warning me for years. During our weekly coffee dates, she'd listened to my latest financial rescue mission with growing concern. "Vera," she'd say gently, "when does helping become enabling?" I'd brush off her worries, insisting that family came first, that I was blessed to be able to help. But deep down I was starting to feel resentful, not because of the money itself, but because my generosity seemed expected rather than appreciated. Thank you cards became rare, then non-existent. The desperate gratitude of early years transformed into casual assumptions that I'd always say yes. The cruise request would prove to be the breaking point I didn't know I needed. When Stephanie called that Tuesday evening, her voice was electric with excitement. She'd discovered this incredible deal on a 7-day Caribbean cruise, she said, but only if they booked within 48 hours. The ship was called the Ocean Majesty, a floating palace with restaurants run by celebrity chefs, a spa that charged $300 for a facial, and suites larger than most apartments. "Vera, you wouldn't believe this ship," Stephanie gushed. "The presidential suite has a private balcony with a hot tub, a living room with a baby grand piano, and our own personal butler available 24/7. The dining experiences alone are worth the price. There's a restaurant where they serve Wagyu beef that costs $200 per person just for dinner." Jason took the phone next, his voice warm but measured. "Mom, I know it sounds extravagant, but Stephanie and I have been working so hard. 15 years of marriage, and we've never taken a real honeymoon. We've always put Madison first, which is right, but we deserve this. We've earned it." Madison's voice piped up in the background. "Grandma Vera, all my friends' parents take amazing vacations. Last year, Emma's family went to Europe for 3 weeks. Chloe's parents have a timeshare in the Bahamas. I just want to have stories like theirs. Stephanie reclaimed the phone, her enthusiasm building. The best part is they have activities for teenagers. Madison could learn to scuba dive, take photography classes, even attend cooking sessions with professional chefs. It's educational and fun. Plus, there's a special New Year's promotion that saves us $15,000, but we have to book by Thursday. The way she presented it made it sound like I'd be foolish to pass up such savings. She had spreadsheets, she said, showing how the cruise was actually economical when you considered all the included meals and entertainment. She'd researched every detail from the thread count of the sheets to the brands of champagne served at the captain's dinner. Jason jumped back in with practical arguments. "Mom, you've always said you wanted us to make memories as a family. This is our chance. Madison won't be a teenager much longer, and soon she'll be too busy with college and her own life to want family trips. This might be our last opportunity to travel together like this." The pressure was subtle but constant. They spoke about the cruise as if it was already decided, mentioning packing lists and shore excursions. They talked about how grateful they'd be, how they'd never ask for anything else, how this one trip would set them up to start fresh financially. But as I listened to their elaborate plans, something felt off. The timing was too perfect, the urgency too convenient. $50,000 for a week-long cruise wasn't a spontaneous discovery. It was a carefully orchestrated presentation. I could hear the rehearsed nature of their arguments, the way they each hit different emotional notes designed to wear down my resistance. When I asked for time to think about it, the disappointment in their voices was palpable. "Of course, Mom," Jason said, but his tone had cooled noticeably. "Take all the time you need." Stephanie's goodbye was clipped professional, nothing like her earlier warmth. That night, I sat with my financial statements spread across the dining room table. My savings account, once comfortable, was lower than it had been in decades. My investment portfolio had shrunk to cover their endless needs. I was 68 years old, and for the first time I worried about my own future security. The next morning I called Jason's house with my answer. My hands shook as I dialed, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything between us. Stephanie answered on the first ring, her voice bright with expectation. "Hi, Vera. Did you have a chance to think about our conversation? I've been checking the cruise website all morning, and they only have a few presidential suites left. I'd hate for us to miss out because we waited too long." I took a deep breath and delivered the words I'd practiced all night. "Stephanie, I've given this a lot of thought, and I won't be able to help with the cruise. My financial situation has changed, and I need to be more careful with my retirement funds." The silence that followed was deafening. When Stephanie finally spoke, her voice had transformed completely. "What do you mean you can't help, Vera? This isn't some frivolous expense. This is our family's happiness we're talking about." I tried to explain about my concerns for my own financial security, about the need to plan for potential health care costs and long-term care, but Stephanie cut me off before I could finish. "You live in a 4-bedroom house all by yourself. You have money, Vera. You're just being selfish. Do you know how hard Jason works? Do you know how much stress he's under trying to provide for us? And you're going to deny us 1 week of happiness because you're worried about money you'll probably never even spend." Her voice was rising, and I could hear Jason in the background telling her to calm down. But she was beyond reasoning now, her disappointment morphing into anger. "We've never asked you for anything we didn't need. Every time you've helped us, it's been for Madison's benefit or for something essential. This cruise isn't just a luxury. It's an investment in our marriage and our family's mental health." When Jason took the phone, I hoped he might be more understanding. Instead, he seemed to side completely with his wife. "Mom, I'm really disappointed. You've always been there for us before. What's different about this time? Is it because you don't approve of Stephanie? Because that's what this feels like." The accusation stung because it was so unfair. I'd bent over backward to support Stephanie, to welcome her into our family, to help them build their life together. But now, the first time I said no, I was being painted as the villain. "This isn't about approval, Jason. This is about financial reality. I've helped you many times over the years, but I can't keep depleting my savings for non-essential expenses." "Non-essential." Stephanie had grabbed the phone back. "Our marriage is non-essential. Our family's well-being is non-essential. Vera, I thought you loved us, but apparently your money is more important than our happiness." The conversation ended with Stephanie hanging up on me, but not before she delivered a parting shot that made my blood run cold. "Don't expect to see much of Madison if this is how you really feel about your family. Some grandmothers actually care about their grandchildren's memories. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of guilt and confusion. Had I been wrong to say no? Was I being selfish with money I might never use? But underneath the doubt was a growing anger at being manipulated, at having my love for my family used as a weapon against me. The next morning, I received a text message from Madison that broke my heart. "Grandma, Mom, and Dad told me you don't want us to be happy. Is that true? I thought you loved me." I knew then that I had to do something drastic. This pattern had to end, not just for my own sake, but for Madison's. She was learning terrible lessons about money entitlement and emotional manipulation. If I didn't take a stand now, what kind of adult would she become? I drove to Jason's house that Saturday afternoon, determined to have a face-to-face conversation and clear the air. The moment I pulled into their driveway, I could sense the hostility. The curtains twitched as someone watched me approach, but no one came to the door to greet me. Jason finally answered my knock, but he didn't invite me in. "Mom, what are you doing here? I thought we said everything we needed to say on the phone. I want to talk to you and Stephanie together. This misunderstanding has gone too far, and I want to explain my position properly." He stepped aside reluctantly, and I walked into a house that felt foreign despite my having helped furnish it. Madison sat on the couch, avoiding eye contact. Stephanie emerged from the kitchen, her arms crossed, her expression cold and unwelcoming. "Well," Stephanie said, "are you here to apologize and write us a check, or are you here to lecture us about money management?" I tried to start calmly explaining my financial concerns and my need to preserve my retirement savings. But Stephanie wasn't interested in explanations. She began listing every penny I'd ever spent on them, as if each gift was a debt I still owed. "You paid for Madison's braces, but she still needs retainers. You helped with our down payment, but now we need a new roof. You bought us a car, but Jason's truck is falling apart. There's always something, Vera, and you've always helped before. What's different now?" "What's different?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "is that I'm getting older and I need to think about my own future care. What if I get sick? What if I need assisted living? I can't keep spending my savings as if they're unlimited." Jason shook his head dismissively. "Mom, you're being paranoid. You're healthy as a horse and you'll probably outlive all of us. Besides, if something happens to you, we'll take care of you. Isn't that what family does?" The irony wasn't lost on me. They expected me to trust them to care for me after they'd just threatened to cut off my access to Madison because I wouldn't fund their vacation. Stephanie's voice grew shriller as she continued her attack. "You know what I think? I think you're lying about your financial situation. I think you have plenty of money hidden away, and you just don't want to spend it on us anymore. Maybe you never really liked me. Maybe you've been looking for an excuse to stop helping us." The accusations were wild and hurtful, but what devastated me most was Jason's silence. He stood there listening to his wife attack his mother's character and said nothing to defend me. When I looked at him pleadingly, hoping he'd intervene, he just shrugged. "Mom, maybe Stephanie has a point. You've never minded spending money on us before. If you really don't have it, maybe you should downsize that big house and move somewhere smaller. Then you'd have plenty of money for the people who matter." The suggestion that I should uproot my life to fund their lifestyle was the final straw. This house held 40 years of memories with my late husband. It was where Jason had grown up, where Madison had taken her first steps during visits. The idea that I should sell it to pay for their cruise was beyond offensive. "Get out!" Stephanie said suddenly, her voice deadly quiet. "Get out of my house, Vera. Don't come back until you're ready to prioritize your family over your bank account." I looked at Jason, waiting for him to contradict his wife, to defend his mother, to show some trace of the son I'd raised. Instead, he nodded in agreement. "I think that's best, Mom. Come back when you're ready to be reasonable." I gathered my purse and walked toward the door, my legs shaking with shock and hurt. As I reached for the handle, I turned back one last time. Madison was crying silently on the couch, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. But she remained quiet, and I stepped out into the cold afternoon air. As I drove home, I realized that something fundamental had broken in our relationship. This wasn't just about a cruise anymore. It was about respect boundaries and the toxic dynamic I'd unknowingly created by never saying no. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone, but also strangely liberated. The weight of their constant expectations had lifted from my shoulders even as my heart broke from the loss. The first 24 hours after leaving Jason's house were the longest of my life. I wandered through my empty home, picking up framed photos of happier times and setting them down again. The silence was oppressive, filled with doubts and second-guessing. Had I overreacted? Was I being prideful and stubborn? Dorothy called that evening, and I found myself pouring out the entire story through tears. She listened without interruption, making small sounds of sympathy and outrage in all the right places. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Vera, honey, I've watched this dynamic for years, and I've bitten my tongue because you weren't ready to hear it. But they've been using you, not just financially, but emotionally. They've trained you to believe that saying no makes you a bad mother and grandmother." Her words hit like a physical blow because deep down I knew they were true. "But Dorothy, what if I never see Madison again? What if they really do cut me off?" "Then they'll be showing you who they really are," she said firmly. "And maybe it's time you showed them who you are too. You're not an ATM, Vera. You're a person with your own needs and limitations." That night, Dorothy suggested something that initially horrified me, changing my will. "I'm not saying you should disinherit them out of spite," she clarified. "But maybe it's time to create some boundaries around your estate too. Maybe it's time to stop rewarding entitled behavior." I couldn't sleep that night thinking about her suggestion. By morning, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I called my lawyer, Mark Thompson, and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Mark's office felt formal and intimidating, filled with leather-bound books and mahogany furniture. As I explained the situation, his expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see understanding in his eyes. He'd probably witnessed similar family dynamics many times before. "Mrs. Patterson," he said when I finished, "what you're describing is unfortunately common. Adult children who become financially dependent on their parents often lose sight of appropriate boundaries. The question is, what do you want to accomplish with these changes?" I thought carefully before answering. "I want to teach them that my generosity isn't unlimited. I want to show them that there are consequences for treating me like a bank rather than a person. But I also want to ensure Madison's future education is secure, regardless of what happens between her parents and me." We spent 2 hours restructuring my will and creating a trust fund for Madison's college education. The bulk of my estate would go to various charities with modest amounts designated for Jason and Stephanie. The message was clear: I valued their relationship, but I wouldn't be taken advantage of anymore. Mark also helped me draft a letter explaining my decisions. The tone was firm, but not vindictive, educational, rather than punitive. I explained that my estate planning reflected my values and priorities, and that I hoped they'd understand my position in time. As I signed the final documents, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I was grieving the loss of the relationship I'd thought we had, while simultaneously reclaiming my autonomy and self-respect. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on my own needs rather than their demands. That evening, I sealed copies of the letter in envelopes addressed to Jason and Stephanie. I also wrote a separate note to Madison explaining that her college fund remained untouched and that my love for her was unconditional. Whatever happened between me and her parents, I wanted her to know she'd always have my support for her education and future. As I dropped the letters in the mailbox the next morning, I felt like I was closing one chapter of my life and opening another. The old Vera who said yes to everything and worried constantly about everyone else's happiness was gone. In her place was someone I was still getting to know, a woman with boundaries, priorities, and the courage to enforce them. The phone started ringing at 7:30 the next morning. I was in my garden, deadheading roses and enjoying the peaceful morning air when I heard it through the open window. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to Jason's frantic message an hour later. "Mom, what the hell is this letter supposed to mean? Call me back immediately. We need to talk about this right now." The second call came 20 minutes later, this time from Stephanie. Her voice was shaky with rage. "Vera, this is beyond cruel. You can't just cut us out of your will because we asked for help with a vacation. This is emotional blackmail, and I won't stand for it." By noon, they'd called 6 more times, each message more desperate and angry than the last. Finally, I answered. Jason's voice was barely controlled when he spoke. "Mom, please tell me this letter is some kind of joke. Please tell me you didn't actually give our inheritance to charity because we hurt your feelings." "Jason, this isn't about hurt feelings. This is about respect and boundaries. Your inheritance isn't gone. It's just significantly reduced. You'll both receive enough to be comfortable, but not enough to depend on." Stephanie grabbed the phone before he could respond. "You vindictive old woman, how dare you use your money to manipulate us? We'll contest this will. We'll fight you in court. You can't just steal our children's future because you're too selfish to help your family." Her words revealed everything I needed to know about how she really saw our relationship. I wasn't a person to her. I was a resource to be mined until exhausted. The mask had finally fallen away completely. "Stephanie, the money was never yours to begin with, and Madison's future is secure. Her college fund remains fully intact, managed by a trust that will ensure she gets a good education regardless of what happens between us." "That's not enough!" she screamed. "We planned our whole financial future around your estate. We made decisions based on what we thought we'd inherit. You can't just change the rules in the middle of the game." Her admission was stunning in its honesty. They'd been planning their financial future around my death, making major life decisions based on money they expected to receive when I died. The cruise, the BMW, the expensive lifestyle they couldn't afford, it was all predicated on eventually inheriting my wealth. Jason took the phone back, his voice pleading now. "Mom, please don't do this. We're sorry about the cruise thing. We're sorry we got upset. Just change the will back and we'll never ask for money again. I promise." But it was too late for promises. The letter had revealed their true feelings, and their reaction to my boundaries had shown me who they really were when they couldn't get what they wanted. "Jason, I hope someday you'll understand that this decision comes from love, not anger. I want you to learn to stand on your own feet, to build a life based on your own efforts rather than my bank account. And I want Madison to see that self-respect and boundaries are important even in families." The conversation ended with more threats and accusations, but I hung up feeling strangely at peace. The worst had happened. They'd shown their true colors, and I was still standing. In fact, I was stronger than I'd been in years. That afternoon, I received a text from Madison that made everything worthwhile. "Grandma, I got your letter. I don't really understand what's happening with Mom and Dad, but I love you no matter what. Thank you for making sure I can still go to college." For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I smiled genuinely. Madison was going to be all right, and so was I. 6 months have passed since that terrible confrontation, and my life has transformed in ways I never expected. The silence from Jason and Stephanie was painful at first, but gradually I've come to appreciate the peace that comes with living free from their constant financial demands and emotional manipulation. I started volunteering at the local literacy center, teaching adults to read. It's incredibly rewarding work that gives me purpose and connects me with people who appreciate my time and effort without expecting anything more. I've also joined a hiking club for seniors and discovered that at 68, I'm capable of adventures I never imagined. Dorothy and I took a cruise last month, ironically enough. A modest 7-day trip that cost a fraction of what Jason and Stephanie had wanted me to spend on them. We laughed about the irony as we watched dolphins from our tiny interior cabin, both of us happy to split the cost and enjoy the simple pleasure of friendship and travel. Madison has been texting me regularly, updating me on her junior year of high school and her college plans. She's interested in studying environmental science, inspired partly by our hiking adventures before the family rift. She seems to understand even at 17 that her parents' reaction to my boundaries was inappropriate and excessive. Through mutual friends, I've heard that Jason and Stephanie's financial situation has become quite difficult. They defaulted on the cruise deposit, which hurt their credit significantly. Stephanie had to sell her BMW and return to driving a more modest car. They've put their house on the market, though, whether by choice or necessity, I don't know. Part of me feels sad about their struggles, but I don't feel responsible for them anymore. They created their financial problems through poor planning and unrealistic expectations. More importantly, they damaged our relationship through their entitled behavior and cruel treatment when they didn't get what they wanted. I've had several sessions with a therapist who specializes in family dynamics, and she's helped me understand that what I experienced was financial abuse. The constant requests, the emotional manipulation, the way they used Madison as leverage, all of it was designed to extract money from me without regard for my own needs or feelings. Learning to set boundaries hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary. I've discovered that saying no doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me a person with self-respect. I've learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enabling disguised as generosity. My relationship with money has changed too. Instead of seeing it as a tool to buy affection and approval, I now view it as a resource that allows me to live independently and pursue my own interests. I've been more generous with charities, more adventurous with travel, and more focused on experiences rather than obligations. The Literacy Center, where I volunteer, is planning a fundraiser, and I've decided to make a significant contribution. It feels wonderful to support a cause I believe in rather than funding someone else's luxury lifestyle. The gratitude from the adult learners I work with is genuine and touching, so different from the entitled expectations I dealt with for years. I think about Madison often and hope that watching this situation unfold has taught her valuable lessons about money, respect, and relationships. I want her to know that love isn't measured in dollars spent and that healthy relationships require mutual respect and consideration. Sometimes I wonder if Jason and Stephanie will ever understand what they did wrong, or if they'll always see themselves as victims of my selfishness. But I've stopped waiting for their apology or acknowledgement. My peace doesn't depend on their understanding anymore. The hardest lesson I've learned is that sometimes loving someone means refusing to enable their destructive behavior, even when that refusal costs you the relationship. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to grow up and take responsibility for their own lives. What I know now is that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about respect, reciprocity, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Real family doesn't use love as a weapon or treat generosity as an obligation. Real family celebrates your boundaries instead of punishing you for having them. As I sit in my garden this morning watching the roses I planted myself bloom in the early summer sunshine, I feel a contentment I haven't experienced in years. I'm no longer walking on eggshells wondering what the next request will be or how I'll find the strength to say no. I'm just living my own life, making my own choices, and discovering who I am when I'm not defined by what I can provide for others. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices, even when those people are your own children. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for survival. And sometimes what feels like the end of everything is actually the beginning of finding yourself. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't respect your limits? Have you experienced the guilt that comes with saying no to people you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please hit the like button if this resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding the courage to stand up for yourself. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being, even when family makes them feel guilty for it. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your peace of mind is worth protecting, no matter what it costs you in relationships that were built on the wrong foundation. May you find the courage to love yourself enough to set the boundaries you need.